hearing will please come to order. Mr. Niels.
Morning, Colonel North.
Good morning, Counsel.
Yesterday you testified about a conversation which you had with the President of the United States on November the 25th, 1986. And I believe you said that he told you, "I just didn't know."
Or words to that effect, yes, sir.
Now, following your conversation with the President, did you happen to run into Robert Earl later that day?
I'm sure that I did. I went back to my office later in the evening, and I'm sure that I did see him there.
And you mentioned, did you not, the conversation that you had had with the President?
Yes, I recall that Lieutenant Colonel Earl was in the office, and he had known that the President had called, I think probably because the original call in the effort to find me, White House Signal had called through to my office.
My question is this, and I need to ask it of you, sir. Did you say to him, in words or substance, that the President had said to you, "It's important that I not know"?
Counsel, I don't recall the conversation that way. I'm sure that what I said was basically what I told you yesterday, and that is that the President had told me I just didn't know. And it may be that the President said it's important that I, Lieutenant Colonel North, understand that he did not know. But I wouldn't have characterized it the way you have just indicated. I don't believe.
Yesterday,
I think it might help if you'd lift the mic a little higher. Thank you.
Sir.
Yesterday, I asked you some questions and you gave some answers about a one-page insert into a draft of Director Casey's testimony that he was going to give on the 21st of November.
Yes.
And I asked you some questions about a meeting that you had had on the 20th of November in which his testimony was discussed and in which this one-page insert was discussed. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And I believe we brought your attention to a document which was marked Exhibit 31, which was that one-page insert, and it had a handwritten interlineation saying, I'll read it verbatim, "No one in the USG found," and the sentence continues, "out that our airline had hauled Hawk missiles into Iran." And you pointed out that that interlineation was not in your handwriting.
That is correct.
Overnight, the committees have uncovered a second version of this one-page insert, which has now been marked Exhibit 31A. And in the same place on the insert, the words "we" and CIA are crossed out, and the words "no one in the USG" is written in. On this new document, is that your handwriting?
That is my handwriting.
So you wrote on the document "no one in the USG," and you wrote that in connection with the sentence that had to do with knowledge that the Hawks had been shipped.
That is correct.
Did you write those words in during the meeting, do you recall, or?
I don't recall when I wrote them, but just to go back to yesterday's testimony, in my description of what that meeting was about, I did not deny that I was trying to change words, and I don't deny that I advocated that. My principal focus in describing the meeting to you was to say that that was not the principal purpose for the meeting. And I willingly admit that I inserted those words. I do not recall myself being an advocate for this being the only subject discussed at the meeting, and I do not recall others at the meeting in any way objecting to those words. I do recall going back with Director Casey to his office in the Executive Office Building and deleting the offensive language.
You're talking now, when you say the offensive language, is that the language that you wrote into this document?
Well, I can't recall what the final version did, but the final version did indeed leave it clear that it was the CIA that did not have knowledge of the Hawk shipment.
But I'm asking you now about, you just referred to the offensive language. Is the offensive language the phrase, "no one in the USG"?
Yes,
And that's the language that you wrote into this document.
that is my writing on this document.
Was anyone else present in your meeting with Mr. Casey when you took that language out?
I don't recall specifically, but it may well have been Mr. Cave. As I recall, we went back directly to Director Casey's office from Admiral Poindexter's office and not only worked on this, but several other portions of his testimony in preparation for his appearance the next day.
Following the meeting on November the 20th, the large meeting in Admiral Poindexter's office, did you receive any telephone calls from Admiral Poindexter or Paul Thompson or anyone else drawing your attention to the fact that the State Department was objecting to this version of the facts?
No, the first recollection I have of anyone in the State Department objecting to that was in news media, I think about the time I was being transferred or shortly thereafter.
I want to make sure that I have asked all the questions that are important to ask. Did you, later on that afternoon, tell someone, either Commander Thompson or Admiral Poindexter, that notwithstanding the fact that others claimed that the U.S. government knew, that you and Mr. McFarland were sticking to your story?
I don't recall that conversation, no.
I asked you some questions yesterday about the Arms Export Control Act. Now, I take it it's true that you were aware long before November of 1986 that there was a problem under the Arms Export Control Act with the Israeli shipments.
I think I became aware of a problem as early as November of '85 when we began to work on what I came to call the replenishment problem. I want to make it very clear, I didn't know there was a replenishment problem until I met directly with the Israeli officials on or about the 17th of November that I can recall. I recall very vividly being told that they understood that there was a commitment for immediate replenishment. Mr. McFarland was still in Europe, and I began to work on solving that problem as well as solving the problem of trying to get beyond the Hawks issue.
And I take it that the problem under the Arms Export Control Act was raised again in January of 1986.
My recollection is that that was addressed, that we could solve the problem by having a written finding which authorized these activities. And that's why I raised the issue yesterday of the discussions that resulted in the original November finding and then the ultimate January 16th or 17th finding, whatever I don't recall the date on it. But I was led to believe that there had been a previous Attorney General determination, if that's the appropriate word, which specified that under a covert action finding, arms could be sold to another party, and that the finding should address that issue of transfers through the CIA. What I'm saying is that we were looking, I thought, for a legitimate way by which these transactions could be either ratified in the case of the previous ones or carried out in the future. And thus the finding was the document, if you will, that did that.
So that it was an issue that was brought to your attention in January as you were planning for the future, that there was a problem raised by the Arms Export Control Act and it needed to be solved.
I believe that issue had already been addressed in November, and that's why I say I want to go back to the November finding. My understanding was that the finding that was prepared and sent to the White House by Director Casey solved that problem, essentially, so that in the course of the time between the 17th, when I was apprised of the need to replenish, and the 26th, my understanding was that we thought we'd solved it.